Graceland Estate, Memphis, Tennessee, July 12, 1977. Tuesday afternoon, 3:15 p.m. Elvis Presley sits alone in his father's office, a book trembling in his hands. The book that has just arrived at Graceland, delivered by a nervous courier who understood he was carrying dynamite. The book that will destroy what's left of Elvis's ability to trust anyone completely. The book written by the men he considered brothers. Elvis, What Happened? Reads the cover, authored by Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler, three men who lived in Elvis's house, ate at his table, shared his secrets, and protected his life for decades. Three men he fired 13 months ago. Three men who have now sold those secrets to the world for money. Elvis stares at the cover photograph. Not a picture of him taken without his knowledge, probably by someone he trusted. His hands shake not from the prescription medications that have become part of his daily routine, but from a betrayal so complete, so unexpected, that it feels like a physical wound. At 42, Elvis Presley has survived almost everything fame can throw at a human being. The pressures of unprecedented success, the isolation of celebrity, the constant demands of millions of fans, the manipulation of a controlling manager, the dissolution of his marriage, and the gradual erosion of his health. But this betrayal, this violation by men he called family, cuts deeper than any of those wounds. "Daddy," Elvis calls out, his voice hollow. "Come in here. You need to see this." Vernon Presley enters the office, sees his son holding the book, and his face immediately hardens. He has heard rumors about this book for weeks, whispers from people in the music industry that Elvis's former bodyguards were shopping a tell-all manuscript to publishers. Vernon had hoped the rumors were just gossip, just another story in an industry built on stories. "Is that it?" Vernon asks, though he already knows the answer. 20 years, Elvis whispers, not looking up from the book. 20 years, Daddy. I knew Red West for 20 years. He saved my life. I trusted him with everything. And this is how he repays me. The relationship between Elvis and Red West began in 1957, when both men were young and the world was a very different place. Red was a football player at Humes High School, 2 years older than Elvis, with a reputation for toughness and loyalty. Elvis was already becoming famous locally, his first recordings creating excitement around Memphis, but fame also created dangers. The danger became real on an October evening in 1957, when Elvis was performing at a local venue and a group of hostile young men, resentful of his success and the attention he received from girls, waited for him in the parking lot after the show. They surrounded Elvis as he walked to his car, their intentions clear. Elvis was outnumbered 5-1, with no escape route and no help in sight. That's when Red West appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, positioning himself between Elvis and the attackers. Red didn't hesitate, didn't calculate odds, didn't consider consequences. He simply saw someone in trouble and acted. The fight was brief but decisive, with Red's football-trained physicality and fearless attitude quickly convincing the attackers to find somewhere else to be. "You didn't have to do that," Elvis told Red as they stood in the empty parking lot afterward. "Yes, I did," Red replied simply. "That's what friends do." That moment created a bond that would define both men's lives for the next 20 years. Red became more than Elvis's friend. He became his protector, confidant, and brother. When Elvis's career exploded nationally, Red was there to shield him from overzealous fans, hostile crowds, and the thousands of threats that come with being the most famous entertainer in America. Red moved into Graceland, not as an employee but as family. He ate meals with the Presleys, shared holidays, knew every secret, every vulnerability, every moment of doubt that Elvis experienced during his rise to unprecedented fame. When Elvis served in the army, Red was there when he returned. When Elvis married Priscilla, Red was at the wedding. When Lisa Marie was born, Red was among the first people to hold her. More importantly, Red understood Elvis in ways that few people could. He saw past the fame and the image to the insecure boy from Tupelo who never quite believed he deserved the success he had achieved. Red watched Elvis struggle with the pressures of being Elvis Presley, witnessed the loneliness that comes with being worshipped by millions of strangers, and provided the kind of unconditional loyalty that allowed Elvis to function in an impossible situation. The Memphis Mafia, as the media dubbed Elvis's inner circle, was built around relationships like the one between Elvis and Red. These weren't employees in any traditional sense. They were friends who happened to be paid for their loyalty, family members who lived together, shared experiences together, and protected each other from a world that saw Elvis as a commodity rather than a person. For nearly 2 decades, this arrangement worked. Red and the other members of the Memphis Mafia provided Elvis with the security and companionship he needed, while Elvis provided them with financial stability, adventure, and the unique experience of being part of something unprecedented in American culture. They traveled together, performed together, and lived through the extraordinary journey of Elvis's career together. But by the mid-1970s, cracks were beginning to show in the foundation of these relationships. Elvis's prescription drug use, which had begun as a solution to the physical demands of constant performing, had evolved into something more serious and more dangerous. His behavior became increasingly erratic, his mood swings more severe, his decision-making more impulsive. The men who had spent decades protecting Elvis from external threats now found themselves trying to protect him from internal ones. Red and the others watched helplessly as the man they loved and respected slowly destroyed himself with the very medications that doctors prescribed to help him cope with the pressures of his life. The situation reached a crisis point in 1976, when Elvis's behavior during performances and personal appearances became so unpredictable that even his closest friends began to fear for his safety and the safety of others. Red and Sonny West, along with Dave Hebler, made the difficult decision to approach Vernon Presley with their concerns, hoping that Elvis's father could intervene in ways that they could not. The confrontation was painful and ultimately futile. Elvis interpreted their concern as betrayal, their attempt to help as an attack on his autonomy. In his mind, clouded by medication and paranoia, the men who had protected him for decades were now trying to control him, to limit his freedom, to treat him like a child who couldn't make his own decisions. On July 13, 1976, Vernon Presley delivered the message that would end 20 years of friendship and loyalty. Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler were fired, their services no longer required, their presence no longer welcome at Graceland. The firing was handled with the cold efficiency of a business transaction. No personal conversation with Elvis, no acknowledgement of 2 decades of service and friendship, no opportunity for explanation or reconciliation. Just a phone call from Vernon, informing them that their salaries would end immediately and they should remove their personal belongings from Graceland as soon as possible. Red West was devastated. At 41, he had spent more than half his life as part of Elvis's world. He had no other career, no other source of income, no other identity beyond being Elvis's friend and protector. The man he had saved from attackers in a parking lot 20 years earlier had just discarded him like an employee who had outlived his usefulness. The financial impact was immediate and severe. Red had a family to support, bills to pay, and no obvious way to earn the kind of money he had grown accustomed to as part of Elvis's organization. The emotional impact was even worse. Red had lost not just a job but a brother, not just income but identity, not just employment but purpose. For months after the firing, Red hoped for reconciliation. He believed that Elvis would realize his mistake, would remember 20 years of loyalty and friendship, would reach out to rebuild the relationship that had meant everything to both men. But that call never came. Red's financial situation became desperate. The salary from Elvis had supported not just Red, but his wife and children, his parents, and extended family members who had come to depend on the stability that his position provided. At 41, Red had no college degree, no other professional skills, no other source of income that could match what he had earned as part of Elvis's organization. The emotional toll was even more devastating. Red had defined himself through his relationship with Elvis for 2 decades. He wasn't just Red West, he was Elvis's Red West, the man who protected the king, the trusted confidant, who knew secrets that millions of fans would pay anything to hear. Without that identity, Red felt lost, purposeless, forgotten. More painfully, Red watched from a distance as Elvis continued his downward spiral, without the protection and support that Red had provided for 2 decades. Every newspaper story about Elvis's erratic behavior, every concert review that mentioned his poor condition, every rumor about his health problems felt like a personal failure to Red. The man he had dedicated his life to serving was destroying himself, and Red was powerless to help. The isolation was complete. Red couldn't return to Graceland, couldn't reach out to Elvis directly, couldn't even maintain relationships with other Memphis Mafia members who were afraid that association with a fired bodyguard might cost them their own positions. 20 years of deep friendships evaporated overnight, leaving Red alone with his resentment and desperation. That's when the publishers approached him. The book deal was presented as an opportunity to help Elvis by telling the truth about his condition, by exposing the prescription drug problem that was killing him, by forcing him to confront reality through public revelation. At least, that's how Red initially justified it to himself. But the real motivation was more complex and more human. Red was hurt, angry, and desperate. 20 years of loyalty had been rewarded with cold dismissal. 2 decades of friendship had ended with a phone call from Elvis's father. The man Red had protected and served had cast him aside without explanation or gratitude. The money offered by the publishers was substantial, more than Red could earn in several years through any other available work. More importantly, the book represented a way to reclaim some power in a relationship where Red had always been the subordinate partner, a way to make Elvis acknowledge his importance by demonstrating what happened when that importance was dismissed. The writing process was emotionally brutal for all 3 men involved. Each revelation, each private moment exposed, each intimate detail shared felt like another betrayal of the friendship they had once cherished. But they convinced themselves they were helping Elvis, forcing him to face truths he was avoiding, creating consequences that might motivate change. Elvis, What Happened, was written over several months in late 1976 and early 1977, with Red, Sonny and Dave providing detailed accounts of Elvis's prescription drug use, erratic behavior, and personal struggles. The book was presented as a loving intervention, an attempt to save Elvis by exposing the truth about his condition to the public. But the book was also revenge, intentionally or not. It revealed private moments, personal vulnerabilities, and intimate details that Elvis had shared in confidence with men he trusted completely. It portrayed him not as the king of rock and roll, but as a troubled, lonely man whose success had isolated him from reality and whose addiction was destroying his life. Now, in July 1977, Elvis holds the finished product in his hands, reading page after page of his most private moments described in clinical detail, his most vulnerable confessions turned into published text, his trust transformed into commodity. How could he do this to me? Elvis asks his father, tears running down his face. I gave him everything, Daddy. I gave him a life, a home, a family. I trusted him with secrets I never told anyone else. And this is how he repays me. Vernon doesn't have an answer, because there isn't a good answer. The betrayal is complete and inexcusable, regardless of Red's motivations or justifications. 20 years of friendship have been sold for money. 2 decades of trust have been violated for profit. I saved his life, Elvis continues, his voice breaking. When he got in trouble, I bailed him out. When he needed money, I gave it to him. When he wanted to feel important, I made him important. I treated him like a brother, and he sold me like a commodity. The impact of the book extends far beyond Elvis's hurt feelings. Published just weeks before Elvis's death, Elvis, What Happened? Exposes his prescription drug problem to the world at a time when he is least able to defend himself or address the issues it raises. The book becomes a sensation, not because it helps Elvis, but because it destroys the image that millions of fans have carried for decades. More devastatingly, the book destroys Elvis's remaining ability to trust anyone completely. If Red West, his loyal protector for 20 years, could betray him so thoroughly, then anyone could. If the man who saved his life could sell his secrets, then no relationship is safe, no confidence is secure, no friendship is reliable. The psychological impact of this realization, coming at a time when Elvis is already struggling with health problems and prescription drug dependency, is overwhelming. The book doesn't save Elvis, as its authors claim to hope. Instead, it removes his last source of comfort, the belief that some people in his life care about him more than they care about money. I don't know who to trust anymore, Elvis tells his father as he sets the book aside. If Red could do this to me, if 20 years meant nothing to him, then what about everyone else? What about all the other people I've trusted, all the other people I've helped, all the other people I've treated like family? The questions hanging in the air are more than philosophical concerns. They are practical problems for a man whose life depends on trusting other people. Elvis can't perform without trusting his band, can't live without trusting his household staff, can't function without trusting the people who manage his career and his daily life. But Red's betrayal has shattered the foundation of that trust. 5 weeks after reading Elvis, What Happened? Elvis Presley is found dead in his Graceland bathroom. The book that was supposed to save him by exposing his problems instead contributed to the isolation and despair that made recovery impossible. Red West attends Elvis's funeral, standing among thousands of mourners, carrying the weight of knowing that his betrayal contributed to the pain that ended his friend's life. The money he earned from the book cannot buy back 20 years of friendship, cannot undo the violation of trust, cannot restore the relationship that had defined both men's lives. In interviews years later, Red expresses regret about the book, claiming that he hoped it would force Elvis to get help, that he believed exposure would lead to intervention and recovery. But the rationalization cannot change the reality. Red chose money over loyalty, profit over friendship, revenge over love. The story of Elvis and Red West is more than just a tale of celebrity betrayal. It's a cautionary story about the corruption of relationships by money, the destruction of trust by desperation, and the price of choosing short-term gain over long-term loyalty. Red West had everything he claimed to value: a loyal friend who trusted him completely, a secure position in an extraordinary organization, and the respect that comes from being essential to someone important. But when that relationship was threatened, when Elvis's problems made him difficult to deal with, when the easy money was gone, Red chose to cash in 20 years of trust for a one-time payment. The tragedy is that Red's betrayal was unnecessary. Elvis's problems were real and serious, but they weren't permanent. With proper medical care and genuine support from people he trusted, Elvis might have overcome his prescription drug dependency and lived many more years. But Red's book destroyed the trust that made recovery possible, isolating Elvis at the moment when he most needed support. Elvis, What Happened became a bestseller, making Red West and his co-authors substantial money. But it also became the epitaph for a friendship that had lasted 20 years and a trust that had seemed unbreakable. The book that was supposed to save Elvis instead helped destroy him, written by the man who had once saved his life. The lesson of Elvis and Red West is simple but profound. Loyalty cannot be bought, but it can be sold. Trust takes years to build, but only moments to destroy. And some betrayals are so complete that they cannot be forgiven, forgotten, or undone. 20 years of friendship, loyalty, and mutual support ended with a book deal and a broken heart. The man who had protected Elvis from external enemies became the enemy who destroyed him from within. And Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, died knowing that even his closest friends could be bought for the right price. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we trust most completely. Sometimes the greatest betrayals come from the people who know us best. Sometimes 20 years of loyalty can be erased by 30 pieces of silver and a publishing contract. Red West saved Elvis's life in 1957 and destroyed it in 1977. The same loyalty that made him a brother became the weapon that broke Elvis's heart forever.